The knock came as Silas scraped his plate clean, the sound sharp against the Montana dusk. He opened the door to a dust-caked woman, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Cooking work," she rasped, but Silas didn't hear her. His gaze locked onto dull silver cross resting against her threadbare collar. Identical, down to the chip corner. The cross he'd carved for his daughter, lost 10 years ago in the chaos of fire and smoke. Ice flooded his veins. Hope, sharp and terrifying, pierced the numbness he'd worn like a second skin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I got something extra special saved just for you. The wind, smelling of pine and the promise of early snow, whistled through the gaps Silas held open. It tugged at the woman's worn shawl, revealing more of the cross. His cross, Elara's cross, the worn with a doorframe dug into his knuckles, grounding him against the dizzying lurch in his chest. 10 years. 10 years of empty searches, phantom glimpses in crowded streets. The slow erosion of hope into a hollow ache beneath his ribs. "Mister?" Her voice was thin, frayed at the edges like her coat. She shifted her weight, a small canvas sack clutched tight against her stomach. Her eyes, a gray he couldn't quite place in the failing light, darted past him into the lamplit warmth of the cabin, then back to his face, wary as a cornered coyote. Silas swallowed, the sound loud in the sudden quiet. He forced his gaze away from the necklace, up to her face. Young, too young for the deep weariness etched around her eyes and mouth. Dust coated her like ash, from the scuffed toes of her boots to the faded calico scarf tied loosely over dark, tangled hair. A bruise, yellowing at the edges, bloomed high on her left cheekbone. Her hands, gripping the sack, were red-knuckled and chapped, but the fingers were long. "Cookin'?" he managed, his own voice rough from disuse. He cleared his throat. "Ain't much call for fancy here. Just needin' work. Fair pay. A roof." Her answer was clipped, rehearsed. She offered no name, no story, just a stark request hanging in the cold air between them. "Can bake. 10 stew. Clean." Silas looked past her shoulder. The valley stretched out, bruised purple and gray in the twilight, empty but for the sighing pines and the distant hoot of an owl. No sign of anyone else. Just this ghost with his daughter's cross. His mind raced, a frantic tumble of impossible hope and crushing dread. Coincidence? A thief? Or? The thought was too fragile, too dangerous to hold. He couldn't send her away. "Not yet. Come in," he said, stepping back. The words felt thick, cold settling in. She hesitated, a flicker of something, relief, fear, crossing her face before she ducked her head and stepped over the threshold. The scent of wood smoke and old coffee mingled with a cold, dusty smell clinging to her. Silas closed the door, shutting out the gathering dark, trapping himself with the mystery. The cabin was sparse, a stone hearth, a rough table, 2 chairs, a cot against the far wall. His world since the fire took Martha, since Elara vanished, since grief became his only companion. He gestured vaguely toward the cold stove. "Supplies in the pantry yonder. Name's Silas Creed." She nodded, already moving toward the pantry, her movements economical, practiced. "Clara," she offered, barely a whisper. "Just Clara. No last name, like a name shed with other things." Silas watched her. Every gesture felt like a clue he couldn't decipher. The way she pushed her hair back from her forehead with the back of her wrist. The slight stoop of her shoulders, as if expecting a blow. She pulled flour, lard, softened the shells, her hands quick and sure despite their roughness. He saw the cross swing forward as she bent, catching the flickering light of the single oil lamp he'd lit, the chip on the lower left arm. He'd dropped the file when carving it. Elara, 6 years old, had declared it perfect anyway. He turned abruptly, busying himself with stoking the fire. Sparks flew up the chimney like fleeing stars. The familiar ache bloomed anew, sharpened by the impossible proximity of that symbol. He remembered tiny hands clutching the cross, the feel of her braids as he tied them, the high, clear sound of her laughter lost in the roar of flames and panicked shouts. The guilt was a stone lodged in his throat. He hadn't been fast enough, strong enough. The rhythmic scrape of a knife against a mixing bowl pulled him back. Clara was cutting lard into flour, her head bent, a curtain of dark hair hiding her face. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Only the crackle of the fire, the scrape of the knife, and the relentless tick of the wind against the window pane filled the space. "Long way," Silas asked, his voice too loud. He winced. She didn't look up. Far enough. From east. A non-answer. Her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. He tried again, leaning against the rough-hewn mantel, the heat from the fire warming his back. Place gets lonely. Good to have someone stir the pot. He cringed inwardly at the awkwardness. Her knife still for a fraction of a second, then resumed. Ain't staying long. Just needing the coin. The finality in her tone was a wall. He watched her work. There was a quiet competence, a resilience instead of her jaw, the efficient movements. She mixed water into the flour and lard, kneaded the dough briefly. It wasn't Alara's playful clumsiness. This was a skill of necessity, learned through hardship. Yet, when she hummed a low, tuneless fragment as she shaped the biscuits, something snagged in Silas's memory. A fragment of melody Martha used to sing, a lullaby from her Tennessee childhood, or just the wind playing tricks. He poured 2 tin cups of cold coffee, slid one across the table towards her as she slid the pan of biscuits into the oven. She flinched slightly at the sound of the cups scraping wood, her gaze darting to the window, then back to the stove. Fear. It was a live thing in the room with them. You run from something. The words were out before he could stop them, blunt as a hammer blow. Her back stiffened. She didn't turn. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, a single word, exhaled like smoke. Yes. The simple admission hung in the air, charged. He wanted to ask what? He wanted to ask who? He wanted to demand to know where she got that cross. But the fear radiating from her thin frame held him back. Pushed too hard and she'd bolt, like a skittish deer. He sipped his coffee, bitter and cold. Place is remote, he said, more to himself than her. Hard to find unless you know it. A reassurance? A warning? He wasn't sure. She just nodded, pulling the biscuits from the oven moments later. The smell of hot bread filled the cabin, warm and comforting, a stark contrast of the tension. She set one on a chipped plate, pushed it towards him without meeting his eyes, then retreated to the far corner of the table with her own. She ate quickly, mechanically, her gaze fixed on the scarred wood surface. Silas picked at his biscuit. It was good, flaky, golden. He watched her. The lamplight caught the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw. "Look at me," he willed silently. "Let me see you." But she kept her head down. When she reached up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the sleeve of her dress pulled back slightly. Silas froze. Coffee sloshed over the rim of his cup, burning his hand. He didn't feel it. On the pale skin of her inner forearm, just below the elbow, was a scar. Small, jagged, white against the grime, shaped like a tiny crooked star. He remembered the day. Alara, 5 years old, chasing a barn kitten, tripped, fell onto the broken hinge of the chicken coop door. Blood everywhere. He'd carried her, screaming, to Martha. The scar had healed white, unique, impossible to replicate. His breath hitched. The biscuit turned to dust in his mouth. The cabin walls seemed to close in. The cross was one thing. A coincidence, maybe. A cruel trick, possibly. But this scar, this intimate, accidental mark from a long-lost afternoon. He stared at Clara. No, at the young woman who wore his daughter's cross and bore his daughter's scar. The cautious hope he tried to smother roared to life, a wildfire in the dry tinder of his grief. Instantly tangled with the terror, or what she was running from. The knock on the door had brought a ghost. Now, looking at that scar, Silas Creed knew the ghost had a name, and the past, cold and relentless as a Montana wind, was finally at his door. Silas didn't sleep. The scar, that tiny crooked star, burned behind his eyelids. Hope, raw and terrifying, war with a decade of grief. Elara, the name echoed in the silence, louder than the wind sawing at the cabin eaves. Across the room, Clara slept on a pallet near the stove, curled tight as a fern in frost, her breathing shallow. Moonlight through the oil parchment window caught the silver cross resting against her collarbone. His hands, calloused from rope and reins, trembled. To speak her name now might shatter this fragile reality. She was here, but she wasn't his. Not yet. She was Clara, haunted and hunted, wearing his daughter's skin and his daughter's scars. Dawn bled gray and cold into the valley. Silas moved like a man underwater, stoking the fire, the iron poker unnaturally heavy. He watched Clara stir, her eyes snapping open with instant alertness, scanning the room before settling. Fear first. Always fear. She saw him watching and flinched, pulling her thin blanket higher, hiding the scarred arm. "Mornin'," Silas rasped, turning quickly to the coffee pot. His voice felt like gravel. He poured her a cup, black and strong. Cold snap settling in. A safe observation. The weather. She accepted the cup, fingers brushing his. Cold. She didn't meet his eyes. Snow's comin'. Her voice was a morning whisper, rough with sleep and something else, the residue of bad dreams. She sipped the coffee, her gaze drifting to the frost-rimed window, seeing things Silas couldn't. Days blurred into a tense vigil. Silas observed every flicker of her lashes, every shift of her shoulders. He saw Elara in the stubborn set of her jaw when she wrestled a heavy pot onto the stove. In the absent-minded way, she pushed her hair back with her wrist. He saw a stranger in watchfulness, the way she froze at unexpected sounds. A branch cracking the woods, the distant cry of a hawk. She cooked with fierce concentration. Biscuits light as air, stews rich with game he'd shot, cornbread with crust that sang. The cabin filled with warmth and the ghosts of Martha's recipes, a bittersweet assault on Silas's senses. Clara hummed sometimes, fragments of that same lullaby, breaking off abruptly as if catching herself in forbidden territory. He found reasons to be near her, mending a harness at the table while she kneaded dough, chopping with just outside the door while she scrubbed pots with sand and lye. He asked careful questions, probing the edges of her silence. "You handle a knife well," he remarked one afternoon as she deftly jointed a rabbit. The firelight caught the silver cross, the chip on its arm stark. Her knife stilled. Had to learn. Her eyes stayed on the task. "Place you learn they treat folks decent?" He kept his tone neutral, scraping at a saddle sore on a leather strap. A long pause. The knife resumed its work, precise, ruthless. Decent ain't the word. The flatness of her voice chilled him more than the wind under the door. She wiped her hands on her apron, a gesture suddenly familiar. The quick, efficient swipe Elara used after feeding the chickens. Silas's breath caught. He needed proof beyond the scar, beyond echoes. One evening, while Clara slept near the bank fire, a worn leather pouch slipped from the folds of her shawl. Silas, pretending to read an old almanac by lamplight, watched. A small, tarnished locket, shaped like a heart, spilled out. Clara stirred, murmured something unintelligible, and clutched the locket tight in her sleep, pressing it to her chest like a talisman against unseen horrors. A new symbol. What memory did that hold? Whose face was hidden inside? The questions gnawed at him. The isolation broke 3 days later with the rattle of wheels and the snort of a tired horse. Silas met Hank Dobbs at the edge of the yard. Hank ran supplies up from 3 Forks, a grizzled mountain of a man with eyes like chipped flint and a voice like rocks tumbling downhill. His buckboard wagon was piled with sacks of flour, beans, and a small keg of nails. "Creed, Hank grunted, climbing down stiffly. His gaze swept the cabin. The smoke curling from the chimney, lingering on Clara, who'd appeared briefly in the doorway before vanishing inside like smoke. Heard you took on help. Need cooking, Silas said, handing over coins. His spine prickled. Hard keeping up alone. Hank spat a stream of tobacco juice, staining the fresh dusting of snow. Aye, especially way out here. He hefted a sack of flour onto his shoulder. Quiet stretch for you, I reckon. Not like down valley. He paused, lowering his voice, though the wind snatched at the words. Strangers in Three Forks. 2 days back. Hard-looking fellas. Asking after a young woman. Dark hair. Traveling alone. Said she stole from him. Hank's eyes flicked meaningfully toward the cabin door. Offered coin for word. Decent coin. Ice flooded Silas's veins. He forced his hands to stay loose at his sides. Lot of dark-haired women passed through. These ones, Hank shifted the flour sack, carry themselves like men used to talking what they want. Got a look about, em. Town's uneasy. He spat again. Reckon they'll fan out. A skin at homesteads. You see em, Creed, you tell 'em nothing. Bad blood follows that kind. Obliged, Hank. Silas took the flour sack, the burlap rough against his fear. Keep your eyes open. Hank nodded. A curt, understanding gesture. Will do. You watch your back. He climbed back onto the buckboard, slapped the reins, and the wagon rattled away, leaving deep grooves in the thin snow and a heavier silence in its wake. Silas carried the supplies inside, the weight of Hank's words pressing down. Clara stood at the stove, stirring a pot of beans, her back rigid. She hadn't looked out. She hadn't needed to. The tension in the small cabin was a living thing. Hank brought supplies, Silas said, unnecessarily loud. He set the flour down. He say anything? Her voice was thin, tight. She didn't turn around. The wooden spoon trembled slightly in her hand. Silas hesitated. The truth felt like handing her a lit fuse. A lie felt like betrayal. Mention strangers in Three Forks. Asking around. He kept it vague, watching the line of her shoulders tense further, knuckles white on the spoon handle. Nothing to fret on yet. A weak comfort. She gave a sharp nod, a jerky movement. Best I check the snares. She grabbed her worn coat, avoiding his eyes. Rabbit stew needs meat. Clara. The name felt strange, wrong. He wanted to say Alara. He wanted to grab her, shield her. Be careful. Snow's deep in the draws. She paused at the door, her hand on the latch. For a fleeting second, her gaze met his. In the gray afternoon light filtering through the window, he saw it. Not just fear, but fierce, desperate resolve. A spark of the resilience that had kept her alive. Always am, she whispered, and slipped out into the biting cold. Silas watched her go, a slight figure swallowed by the vastness of the pines and the falling snow. He checked his coat, the worn wood and cold metal familiar in his palm. He walked the perimeter of the yard, his boots crunching on the frozen crust. Near the woodpile, partially covered by fresh snow, he saw them, boot prints, too large to be Clara's. Too deliberate, leading from the tree line toward the cabin. Circling back, fresh since Hank left. Someone had watched the exchange. Someone was watching now. He scanned the ridge line, a dark smudge against the lowering sky. Nothing moved but the wind-tossed pines. Yet the feeling of eyes prickled his neck. They're here, the pursuers Hank warned of. They'd found the scent, the fragile piece of the past few days shattered like thin ice. He turned back toward the cabin, his heart pounding a war drum against his ribs. He needed to find Clara, get her inside, bar the door, prepare. As he reached the porch steps, a sound froze in mid-stride. Not the wind, not an animal. A choked cry, cut short, coming from the direction of the creek, where Clara had gone to check the snares. The world narrowed to the icy air burning his lungs and the sudden, absolute silence that followed the cry. Silas drew the Colt, the click of the hammer echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Every nerve screamed. He plunged into the trees, snow dragging his boots, following the faint, desperate path Clara had made moments before. Branches whipped at his face. The creek murmured ahead, hidden by a thicket of willow. He burst through the last screen of brush into the small clearing by the water. Clara stood rigid, facing two men. They were exactly as Hank had described. Hard-faced, bundled in thick coats, their breath pluming in the cold air. One, broad and thick-necked, held a coiled whip loosely at his side. The other, leaner, with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, had a hand outstretched, palm up, demanding. Clara clutched her snare line, a single dead rabbit dangling, her face bone-white but set in defiance. The silver cross glinted at her throat. The lean man's voice was a low growl, carrying clearly in the frozen air. "Time's up, girl. The Major wants his property back." His eyes, flat and cold as river stones, locked onto the cross. "And he wants what you stole." The lean man's words hung in the frozen air, sharp as shattered glass. The Major wants his property back. Silas didn't think. Instinct, honed by years of loss in the raw, screaming hope clutching his heart, took over. He stepped fully into clearing, the Colt Peacemaker leveled, its barrel unwavering on the scarred man's chest. The click of the hammer being thumbed back was deafening in the sudden silence. "Step away from her." Silas's voice was low, colder than the creek ice grinding beneath the bank. Snowflakes caught in his beard, melting against skin taut with fury. "Now!" Both men spun, surprise flickering across their hard faces before settling into wary calculation. The thick-necked man with the whip tense, his knuckles whitening on the coiled leather. The scarred one, eyes narrowed like a snake assessing prey, didn't move his hand from its outstretched demand towards Clara. "This ain't your concern, old man," the scarred one drawled, though his gaze flickered nervously to the Colt. "Just collecting what's owed. Walk away." Clara stood frozen, a statue carved from ice and defiance. The dead rabbit dangled forgotten from her grip, her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto Silas. Not pleading, assessing, calculating her own move. The silver cross seemed to burn against the dull wool of her collar. "She's under my roof," Silas stated, taking another step forward, crunching snow deliberately. "That makes her my concern. You got 5 seconds to turn around and ride out, or you stay here permanent." He shifted his aim fractionally towards the whipman's knee, a deliberate, unspoken promise of crippling pain. The whipman shifted his weight, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The scarred man's hand twitched toward his own coat, where the bulge a holster lay hidden. Silas saw Clara's breath hitch, saw the flicker of desperate resolve in her gray eyes. Before either man could act, she moved. Not away, towards the scarred man. A sudden, jerky lunge, her free hand flashing out not to strike, but to fling a handful of gritty snow and frozen gravel snatched from the bank straight into his eyes. He roared, stumbling back, hands clawing at his face. The distraction was instant, chaotic. The whipman instinctively turned towards his companion's cry. Silas fired, not at flesh. The bullet tore into the snowbank inches from the whipman's boot, spraying ice and mud. Next one finds bone. Silas bellowed over the gunshot's echo, the acrid smell of burnt powder cutting to the cold. He advanced, the Colt steady. "Drop the whip, both of you, hands high." Cursing, spitting snow, the scarred man blinked furiously, tears streaming down his ruined cheek. The whipman hesitated, rage warring with the primal fear induced by the unwavering gun and the sudden, unexpected ferocity of their quarry. Slowly, with a snarl, he let the whip fall. It coiled in the snow like a dead snake. Both raised their hands, palms out. "The Major don't take kindly to interference," the scarred man spat, one eye still watering. "You're marking yourself, old man. She's stolen goods. Belongs to him." "She's a person," Silas ground out, his gaze never leaving them, though he felt Clara's presence like a brand at his side. He could hear her ragged breathing. "Get on your horses. Ride back to this major. Tell him Clara Creed ain't property. Tell him if he sends more dogs, I'll put him down." Creed. The name hung heavy. A claim, a shield. Clara flinched beside him. A tiny intake of breath. The scarred man's good eye widened slightly, then hardened. He spat into the snow near Silas's boot. "Creed, we'll remember that name. You'll regret it." He jerked his head at his partner. They backed away slowly, never turning their backs, until they vanished into the skeletal willows, the crunch of their retreat fading into the wind's moan. Silas didn't lower the colt until the sounds were gone, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. Only then did the tremors start deep in his core. He turned. Clara was staring at him, her face pale as the snow, eyes huge. She still clutched the dead rabbit, its blood darkening the ice at her feet. The defiance was gone, replaced by a raw, vulnerable shock. "Clara Creed," she whispered, the name sounding foreign on her lips. Silas holstered the colt, his movements stiff. "Seemed right," he muttered, unable to voice the torrent inside. The hope that the name was right, the terror of what claiming it might bring. "Let's get inside. They ain't done." He touched her elbow, a brief, awkward gesture. She didn't pull away, but she flinched at the contact, a tremor running through her. She nodded mutely, falling into step beside him as they hurried back towards the cabin through thickening snow, the silence between them charged with unspoken truths and the ghosts of the confrontation. Inside, Silas barred the heavy door. The familiar warmth of the cabin felt fragile, besieged. Clara stood rigidly by the stove, shivering despite the heat radiating from the iron. She mechanically began skinning the rabbit, her movements jerky, her gaze distant, fixed on some internal horror. Blood stained her red-knuckled hands. Silas checked the window shutters, his mind racing. The major, stolen goods, property. The words curdled in his gut. He built up the fire, the crackling logs loud in the tense quiet. He needed answers. "Now, Clara," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He pulled out a chair, sat heavily. "Who's the major?" Her knife stilled on the rabbit carcass. She didn't look up. "Jotham Rourke. The name was a curse. Runs a diamond are spread. South. Big. Powerful." Her voice was flat, drained. "Thinks he owns everything. Everyone." Her knuckles whitened on the knife handle. "And you?" Silas pressed, leaning forward slightly. "You belong to him?" A shudder racked her thin frame. She finally looked up, her gray eyes haunted pools. "Not belonged. Worked in the big house. Since I can remember proper." Her gaze flickered to the silver cross at her throat, then away, as if burned. "He ain't a man you say no to." The bruise on her cheek seemed to darken in the firelight. "The locket," Silas said gently, seeing the shape of it beneath her dress. "Hank said they claimed you stole something." "That it?" Clara's hand flew instinctively to her chest, covering the hidden lump. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to Silas, filled with a complex mix of fear and fierce protectiveness. "It's mine," she insisted, the first spark of defiance returning. "My mother's. Only thing I ever had of hers. He kept it in a box, like proof." Her voice cracked. Proof he owned her, too. Before she trailed off, swallowing hard, unable to finish. The unsaid word died, hung heavy. Silas's breath caught. Her mother's. Martha's locket? The one he'd given her? The one lost in the fire? Hope, painful and bright, flared. He remembered Martha wearing it, the tiny heart warm against her skin. "Clara, can I see it?" She hesitated, weariness battling a desperate need for someone, anyone, to understand. Slowly, painfully, she pulled a small leather pouch from inside her dress. With trembling fingers, she extracted the tarnished silver heart. She didn't open it, just held it out on her palm, a fragile offering of trust. Silas reached out, his own hand unsteady. He didn't take it. He simply touched the cold metal, turning it slightly in her palm. Firelight caught the delicate engraving on the front. Intertwined initials. M&S Martha and Silas. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knew what the inside would hold. A tiny, faded daguerreotype of Martha, young and smiling, a lock of Alara's baby hair tucked behind it. He looked from the locket to Clara's face, etched with hardship but bearing the undeniable echoes of Martha in the curve of her cheekbone, the stubborn set of her chin. The cross, Martha's locket, the scar. The fragments coalesced into a staggering, terrifying certainty. This wasn't just hope. This was his daughter, stolen by fire only to be swallowed by a different kind of hell. Alara, he breathed, the name a raw scrape of sound, laden with 10 years of grief and dawning, overwhelming recognition. Clara's head snapped up. She stared at him, confusion warring with strange, unsettling flicker deep in her eyes. What did you call me? Before Silas could answer, a heavy thud chipped the cabin door. Not a knock, an impact, like something thrown hard against the thick wood. Then the unmistakable, chilling sound of a match being struck close outside. A flickering orange light bloomed beneath the door crack, casting dancing, malevolent shadows on the cabin floor. A voice, rough and unfamiliar, called out, thick with malice, "Creed, the Major sent a message. Dawn, you sent her out, or we burn this rat hole down around your bones. Enjoy the warmth while it lasts." The voice outside faded, leaving only the wind's low moan and the ominous flicker of orange light beneath the door. The smell of coal oil and burning pitch seeped through the cracks, acrid and threatening. Silas lunged, snatching the heavy wool blanket from his cot and smothering the glowing embers near the threshold. Smoke stung his eyes, but the immediate threat died, leaving a charred, oily stain on the wood. He barred the door's inner brace, a thick timber sliding into iron brackets, then dragged a heavy table against it. Every scrape, every thud, echoed in the charred silence. Clara stood frozen near the stove, one hand pressed against her mouth, the other clutching the unopened locket, so tightly her knuckles were bloodless. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, were fixed on the door, on the phantom glow that had just faded. The name Silas had breathed, Alara, seemed to hang in the smoky air between them, as tangible and dangerous as the threat outside. "They meant it," she whispered, the sound raw. Not fear exactly, resignation. A terrible familiarity with such ultimatums. "They'll try," Silas corrected, his voice tight as he checked the shutters, finding them sturdy. He turned to her, the weight of the past hour crashing down. The locket, the cross, the scar, the impossible truth. Dawn's hours off, gives us time. He moved towards her, stopping a pace away. The firelight caught the silver cross, the chipped corner he'd made. "Alara," he said again, the name softer now, a plea wrapped in grief and dawning wonder. She flinched as if struck. "Don't." She backed a step, pressing against the warm iron of the stove. "That ain't me. Clara. Just Clara." Her gaze darted away from his, landing on the rabbit carcass, still lying on the table, blood dark on the wood. "Rourke's men, they don't bluff. He wants the locket back. Proof, he calls it. Proof he owned the woman who had before." Her voice hitched. "Proof he owns me." Silas's heart hammered. He saw Martha's face superimposed over Clara's, the same determined set to the jaw beneath the weariness, the same arch to the brow. The woman was Martha Creed. "Your mother." He pointed a trembling finger at the locket, clenched in her fist. "Open it." Hesitation wore with a desperate, buried curiosity in her eyes. Slowly, as if handling live dynamite, she pried open the tarnished silver heart. Inside, protected by cloudy glass, a tiny, faded daguerreotype showed a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Martha, years before the fire. Beside it, carefully preserved, was a tiny curl of pale, baby fine hair tied with a minute blue thread. Clara's breath hitched. She stared, unblinking. Her fingers traced a glass over Martha's face, then hovered over the lock of hair. A tremor ran through her. I remember hair. Soft, like this. Her voice was a child's whisper, lost and afraid. And smoke. So much smoke. Loud. A man, not Rourke, then grabbed me. Rough hands. Tore me away from the soft hair. Her eyes snapped up to Silas, filled with sudden, terrifying clarity mixed with anguish. The fire, the screaming, your fire, the guilt Silas had carried for a decade, the image of failing to pull her free from the collapsing timbers, surged like bile. They took you, he rasped, the word scraping raw. While I dug for Martha, while everything burned, they stole you from the ashes. He took a step closer, needing her to see, to understand. Jotham Rourke didn't just take a servant. He stole a daughter. My daughter. Ilara. The name hung there. Clara, Ilara, stared at the locket, then at Silas. Recognition warred with a lifetime of enforced identity. Ilara, she breathed, testing the syllables. It felt foreign, yet somehow resonated deep in a place buried under years of being Clara, the nameless drudge. A tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I dreamed, sometimes, of a man carving wood. A cross. Her hand touched the silver at her throat, and a woman singing that tune I hum. She looked at Silas, truly looked, searching his face as if seeing it for the first time. The resemblance to her own features, obscured by hardship but undeniable now, seemed to dawn on her. A choked sob escaped her. They told me I was nothing, nobody's child. Silas reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently closed her fingers around the locket, his own hand covering hers. It was cold. You're somebody's child. Mine. And I won't let him take you again. The vow was absolute, forged in fire and regret. The moment shattered with a soft, rhythmic tapping on the back shutter. 3 quick raps. A pause. 2 more. Silas tense, hand flying to his coat. Clara instinctively shrank back, fear flooding her newly awakened eyes. Creed, a low voice hissed through the wood. It's Hank. Don't shoot, damn it. Saw the bastard skulking back towards the ridge. Figured they'd try something ugly. Silas cautiously cracked the shutter. Hank Dobbs stood hunched against the wind-driven snow, his face grim in the pre-dawn gloom, leading his sturdy pack mule laden with sacks. Heard the shot earlier, Hank grunted, stamping snow from his boots as Silas let him in. He barred the shutter behind him. His flinty eyes took in the barricaded door, the soot stain, Clara's tear-streaked face, and the locket still clutched in her hand. Figured it weren't social. He nodded at Clara. They mean business, miss. Rourke's got a half-dozen hard cases holed up at the old line shack a mile south. Saw M when I cut cross-country. More coming. I reckon he don't like being crossed. Got the sheriff in 3 Forks eaten out of his hand, too. Claims you stole valuable property. His gaze lingered meaningfully on Clara. She is the property, Silas said, the anger cold and sharp. My daughter, stolen 10 years ago from the ashes of our home. Rourke's men took her. Hank's bushy eyebrows shot up. He looked from Silas's fierce expression to Clara's haunted eyes, then slowly nodded, a deep understanding settling over his weathered features. Explains the look of you, miss, and the fire in his eyes. He spat toward the cold stove. Rourke, snake, always knew it. What's the play, Creed? You can't hold this cabin against a dozen guns. Silas looked at Ilara. Her fear was still there, raw and present, but beneath it now was a spark. A flicker of the girl stolen, the woman fighting back. She met his gaze, her chin lifting slightly. We run, she said, the decision firming her voice. Not towards 3 Forks. Away, north, through Crowlands. Gray wolf band winters near the Medicine Rocks. They know me. Traded herbs with his woman. Sometimes when Rourke sent me out, they don't like Rourke. Might give us shelter, or point us further. Hope, fragile but fierce, bloomed in Silas's chest. She had a plan. Alara had a plan. Hank rubbed his stubbled jaw. Risky, but saner than waiting for the burning. He gestured to his mule. Got extra ammunition here. Some jerky. Blankets. You'll need Snow's deepening fast. I'll draw 'em off. Head east towards town, loud like, give you a head start. Hank! Silas began to dead immense. Ain't doing for you, Creed. Hank grunted, already turning to the shutter. Doing it 'cause some things just ain't right. Now get that girl gone. He slipped back out into the swirling gray dawn. They moved quickly, silently. Alara. The name felt less foreign now. A mantle she was tentatively trying on. Packed food, ammunition, and the precious locket deep into saddlebags. Silas saddled his two strongest horses in the lean-to, the animals stamping nervously, sensing the tension. The snow was falling thickly now, a blessing and a curse, covering tracks, but slowing flight. As Silas tightened the last cinch, Alara touched his arm. She held out the open locket. Look, she whispered. Inside, beside Martha's picture in the baby hair, she placed a small, rough-cut biscuit, still warm from the stove. A silent offering, a connection forged anew. He saw the echo of Martha's resilience in her eyes, the stubborn severed jaw that was all Alara, his daughter. Found. They led the horses out the back, away from the front where the threat simmered. The world was a monochrome blur of wind-driven snow. Silas helped Alara mount, his hand lingering on her boot for a second, a father's touch, tentative and fierce. He swung into his own saddle, the colt heavy and ready at his hip. The path north, toward the distant, snow-shrouded peaks and the slim hope of Crow's sanctuary, vanished into the whiteout just yards ahead. They urged the horses forward, plunging into the blinding storm. They'd gone less than 100 yards, the cabin vanishing behind a curtain of snow, when a sharp crack split the air. Not thunder, rifle fire. From the ridge, overlooking the creek, a geyser of snow erupted near Alara's horse. The animal shied violently. Silas whirled, drawing his colt, scanning the ridge through the stinging snow. Figures moved, dark shapes against the gray. More than two, many more. Rourke hadn't waited for dawn. They'd been flanked, trapped in the open. And Hank Dobbs's diversion hadn't been enough. The cold certainty settled over Silas. Escape had just turned into a desperate fight for survival, surrounded in a frozen white hell. Alara's horse reared, her cry lost in the wind as another shot echoed, closer this time. The rifle shot's echo died in the swirling snow, replaced by the panicked scream of Alara's horse and the whistle of another bullet slicing the air close to Silas's head. Snow exploded near the animal's hooves. Dark figures moved on the ridge above the creek, silhouetted against the bruised dawn sky, methodically advancing, firing down into the white blindness where Silas and Alara were exposed. Dismount! Silas roared, already sliding from his saddle, yanking his Winchester carbine from its scabbard. He grabbed the reins of Alara's plunging horse, pulling both animals toward the meager cover of a snow-laden pine cluster. Down, Alara! Now! Alara hit the snow beside him, scrambling behind the thickest trunk. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with familiar terror pursuit, but her hands were steady as she drew the small skinning knife from her belt. No longer Clara, the drudge, Alara, fighting for her life. Silas levered around into the chamber. The metallic clacked sharp in the frozen air. He peered around the tree, sighting on a dark shape moving laterally along the ridge. He fired. The figure stumbled, disappearing into the snowdrift. A cry of pain answered the shot. Got one! Silas hissed, ducking back as return fire peppered the tree trunk, showering them with bark and ice. 6, maybe 7 left. The storm was their only ally. reducing visibility to yards, muffling sound. But Rourke's men had the high ground in numbers. They were being pinned, slowly surrounded. Illyra pressed against a tree, her gaze fixed on the ridge. "The creek gully," she whispered, her voice tight but clear. "Behind us. Steep sides. If we can get into it, follow it north, it winds towards Medicine Rocks. Harder for them on horseback up there." Silas saw the desperate logic. The gully was a treacherous, ice-slicked trench, but offered concealment the open slope denied. "Cover me," he ordered, shifting position to lay down suppressing fire towards the advancing shadows. "Run for the gully edge when I say. Don't stop." He rose, firing rapidly, levering and shooting, the Winchester bucking against his shoulder. Bullets whined past, kicking up snow. One grazed his left forearm, a hot sear pain. He ignored it. "Now! Go!" Illyra lunged from cover, a small, swift shadow diving headfirst over the lip of the gully and vanishing into the deeper snow below. Silas fired 2 more shots, then scrambled after her, sliding and tumbling down the steep, snow-choked bank. He landed hard beside her at the bottom, the icy creek water soaking through his trousers instantly. Above, angry shouts and confused firing echoed as the pursuers lost sight of their quarry. They crouched, gasping, in the relative shelter of the gully wall. Silas ripped a strip from his shirt, binding his bleeding arm. Illyra watched, her face pale but set. "You're hit." "Scratch." Silas grunted, tying the knot tight. "Can you run?" She nodded, her eyes scanning the gully upstream. "This way." Quickly, she led, moving with surprising sure-footedness despite the deep snow and treacherous ice, following the winding path of the frozen creek. Silas followed, leading the horses who balked and snorted at the difficult footing. The gully deepened, walls rising higher, the world above reduced to a narrow strip of gray sky, and a relentless fall of snow. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, muffled by the storm and the winding path. They ran, stumbled, and crawled for what felt like hours, the cold gnawing deep, exhaustion a heavy cloak. Hope was a fragile ember. Then, rounding a sharp bend, Illyra stopped dead. Silas nearly collided with her. Ahead, blocking the gully, stood 3 mounted figures. Not Rourke's men. These riders wore thick buffalo robes, their faces shadowed by hoods, long rifles resting casually across their saddles. They sat utterly still, silent as the snow itself. Silas's hand tightened on his Winchester, despair warring with defiance. Trapped, Illyra, however, took a hesitant step forward. She raised a hand, palm out, in a gesture of peace. "Gray Wolf," she called, her voice thin but clear. "It is Clara from the Diamond R, the one who traded Yarrow for your woman's cough." The central rider nudged his horse forward a few steps. He pushed back his hood, revealing a face deeply lined by wind and sun, framed by long iron-gray braids. His eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, studied Illyra, then Silas, the wounded arm, the weary horses, the direction they'd come from. He spoke, his voice low and resonant, carrying easily in the gully stillness. "Clara who cooks. You run from Rourke's wolves." "Yes," Illyra breathed, and my father." She gestured toward Silas, the word still new, raw. "They mean to kill us. Take us back." Gray Wolf's gaze shifted to Silas, taking to set his jaw, the protective stance near Illyra. He looked back the way they'd come, listening. The distant crack of a single rifle shot echoed faintly down the gully. Rourke's men, still searching, drawing closer. Gray Wolf exchanged a look with the riders flanking him. A silent conversation passed. He nodded curtly. "Rourke's poison spreads," Gray Wolf stated. "His men trespass, scare the game. We have seen them." He gestured north with his chin. "Our camp is near. Come, the snow will hide your trail. We will speak of wolves at our fire." He turned his horse, his companions falling in behind him, creating a path through the deep snow for Silas and Alara to follow. The Crow Camp, nestled in a sheltered pine grove near the base of the towering Medicine Rocks, was a small cluster of high teepees, smoke curling lazily from their tops despite the storm. The smell of wood smoke, roasting meat, and cured hides was a balm. Gray Wolf's woman, Small Bird, with kind eyes and deft hands, ushered them into the relative warmth of their teepee. She tended Silas's arm with a pungent poultice of herbs, murmuring softly in Crow, while Gray Wolf listened as Silas, haltingly, told the fire 10 years past, the kidnapping and Rourke's claim. Alara sat close, adding details in a low voice. The locket stolen by Rourke is proof of ownership, the years of servitude, the escape. She opened the locket, showing Small Bird the picture of Martha and the lock of baby hair. Small Bird touched the image gently, her expression sorrowful. Gray Wolf smoked a pipe, his face impassive. "The white man's law," he said finally, exhaling fragrant smoke. "It bends for men like Rourke. His paper says she is his, then his word is strong in the fort, in the town. The man with a star on his chest listens to Rourke's gold." He tapped the pipe stem. "You cannot go back to your cabin. He will burn it. He will send more wolves. His paper gives him power." The truth settled like a stone. Sanctuary here was temporary. Rourke's reach, backed by a corrupt legal system, was long. Silas felt the weight of the fight shifting, not ending. "We need to get further away," he said, his voice rough. "Somewhere his paper don't hold sway. Maybe north into Canada." Gray Wolf nodded slowly. "The snow is deep. The passes are treacherous. Wait, let the wolves lose the scent. Let the storm pass. Then we know trails the white men do not. We can guide you to the Milk River. From there, north is open." He looked at Alara. "You are not Rourke's property. You are Alara Creed. Remember this. Hold it inside." He touched his chest. That night, wrapped in borrowed buffalo robes near the central fire inside the teepee, Silas and Alara sat in exhausted silence. The wind howled outside, but the air inside was thick with the scent of stew, herbs, and wood smoke. Safe for now. Alara traced the chipped corner of the silver cross at her throat, then opened the locket, gazing at Martha's picture in the firelight. "I remember her voice," she whispered, so softly Silas almost didn't hear. "Singing that tune. When the smoke came, she pushed me toward the window, told me to run. Then the beam fell. A tear tracked down her cheek. I ran, right into Rourke's man waiting outside. The guilt and grief were still there, a deep ache in Silas's chest, but tempered now by a fierce, protective love. He reached out, covering her hand that held the locket with his own. Her fingers, cold at first, slowly curled around his. A connection forged in shared loss, battle, and reclaimed blood. "She saved you," Silas murmured. "Gave you back to me. We'll honor that. We'll live free." Alara leaned her head against his shoulder, a tentative gesture of trust, of belonging. "Alara Creed," she said, testing the full name, owning it. It fit. Outside, the storm still raged, and the shadow of Jotham Rourke loomed large over the territory. The legal battle, the running, the uncertainty, it was all ahead, but in the warm circle of firelight, surrounded by unexpected allies, holding his daughter close, Silas Creed felt a fragile, hard-won peace settle over him. They had survived the ambush, the flight, the fire at the door. They had found each other. The cross gleamed dully against Alara's skin, the locket warm in their joined hands. Talismans of the past, anchors for the future. The fight wasn't over, but for this moment, buried deep in the snow-shrouded heart of the Medicine Rocks, father and daughter were home. Dawn and the long journey north could wait,